Good morning. Thank you for joining us today for our Farm Foundation Forum, Advancing Digital Agriculture at the Farm Level. We are glad to have the opportunity to engage with you today. My name is Martha King, and I am the Vice President of Programs and Projects at Farm Foundation, located just outside of Chicago, Illinois. I am also a co-owner of the Illinois farm my family has owned and managed for over 100 years. Obviously, the farm has seen extraordinary changes over the past century and a half, and today we are excited to be able to partner with our farmer using digital agriculture tools to ensure we are working together as a team to communicate and make the best decisions for our operation. That's just one of the reasons I'm looking forward to this discussion on digital agriculture today. I know the benefits we have realized on our own farm, but I also know there are many challenges and opportunities still ahead. We have lined up an excellent panel to dig into those topics today. Before we get into today's program, I'd like to just take a few moments to share a bit more about Farm Foundation. We are a 501c3 nonprofit working at the intersection of agriculture and society to address challenges that affect the entire food and ag value chain. Specifically, we are an accelerator of practical solutions for agriculture, accelerating people and ideas into action. The three levers we use to accomplish this are policy, innovation, and education. Forums such as today's are just one part of our extensive program of work, which is guided by our mission to build trust and understanding at the intersection of agriculture and society, and our vision to build a future for farmers, our communities, and our world. We rely on partnerships to fund our work and increase our impact. So if you're interested in learning more about funding or partnering with us, I invite you to reach out to explore collaboration. One easy way to support our mission is to text the word FIELD to the number 44321. You'll then receive additional instructions on how to donate to Farm Foundation right from your phone. I also encourage you to learn more about Farm Foundation and our work by visiting our website at farmfoundation.org or connecting with us on our social media platforms. If you are posting on social media about this morning's session, we ask that you please use #FarmFoundationForum. And as we get underway with today's forum, I would also like to quickly go over notes. We invite you to submit questions by clicking on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. When submitting questions, please include your name and organization so questions may be contextually understood. And due to time limits, we may not be able to ask all questions submitted, but we'll certainly do our best. This forum is being recorded and will be posted on our website at farmfoundation.org, and we'll send out that link following today's program. If there are any connectivity issues during the forum, we ask that you stay on the forum as those generally rectify themselves after a few moments. And finally, when the forum concludes, you will receive a link to a short survey. Farm Foundation appreciates your feedback and your time in completing the short survey. Now let's turn to today's forum topic. The past decade has seen great advances in ag tech, but practical barriers to access and adoption at the farm level still persist. We are glad to provide this opportunity today for farmers and other stakeholders to hear from speakers from various parts of the industry as they examine the implications and opportunities for digital agriculture going forward. It is now my pleasure to introduce Shari Rogge-Fidler, President and CEO of Farm Foundation, who will be our moderator for today's session. Shari is a fifth-generation farm owner-operator from Nebraska, as well as a former CEO of an ag tech company. So she also has firsthand experience with digital agriculture issues, in addition to a wealth of experience in many other areas of the food and ag industries. So Shari, let's get today's discussion started.
Thank you so much, Martha, and thank you to all of our speakers and our audience joining us today. This is a topic that's both personally and professionally important to me, so I'm really looking forward to hearing from our speakers and our audience today. Over the last 10 years or so, as Martha mentioned, we've seen an explosion of VC and corporate funded innovative technologies. Digital agriculture is a key priority at Farm Foundation because we know it's a key to the future of both food and agriculture. Over the last year or two, we've hosted forums or workshops on digital ag from an investor lens, from a use case of digital ag and conservation, and we've looked at one key barrier, that of data interoperability, in one of our previous sessions. Today, we'll be looking at some of the barriers and enablers of on-farm digital ag adoption, including rural broadband. We'll be hearing from several speakers first, and then we'll open the floor up to questions. So I'd like to introduce our first speaker today, Teddy Bekele. Teddy is Senior Vice President and Chief Technology Officer at Land O'Lakes. He has a passion for researching, developing, and implementing innovative technology solutions to help farmers produce more nutritious food while using fewer resources in new and sustainable ways. Most recently, he was appointed as chairman of the Minnesota Broadband Task Force, as well as chairman of the FCC Task Force for Precision Agriculture Connectivity and Adoption. So Teddy, I welcome you and ask you to share any more about your background and then to dig into the topic for today. So over to you, Teddy.
Thank you so much, Shari, and good morning, everyone. Glad to be here with you. As Shari mentioned, I'm the Chief Technology Officer at Land O'Lakes, farmer-owned cooperative. I have the pleasure of working with a lot of farmers in our retail network on developing new technologies and how we bring them to the field, to the producer, but also on the other end to consumers, right? And how they can interact better with their food. So very interesting space. I'll walk you through a little bit of our organization and then walk you a little bit about some of the technology we work on, but then hit on some of the barriers, as Shari mentioned today, in deploying some of this technology that's available. So if we go to the next slide, we think about Land O'Lakes, who are we? Like I said, farm to fork cooperative. There's nearly 2,000 dairy producers that are part of this cooperative. There's about 1,100 to 1,200 retailers that operate in various states within the country. And what they do is they buy inputs from us. So whether it's feed to sell to animal owners, or crop inputs, so that'd be seed, fertilizer, crop protection, and other plant nutrition products. And they in turn work with a number of producers. We touch nearly 400,000 producers throughout the United States. So that's a little bit of our makeup. And if we go to the next slide, talk a little bit about some of the divisions within Land O'Lakes. And we cover the full spectrum from the time in which the seed's planted through our Winfield United division, which is our crop inputs business, to the animal feed, which is Purina. Most people know Purina for the dog and cat, but we cover every other species except for dog and cat. That's part of the Nestle portfolio. And then there's a Land O'Lakes product, which is what you buy in the store, butter, cheese, and other refrigerated desserts that you can find in those aisles. And then we have a Truterra business unit. That's the newer business unit, and really looking across all our divisions and looking at sustainability not only within a division. So how can we help farmers sustainably farm their land, but at the same time, you have that chain of, the grain that's produced off of those fields is used as an ingredient to the feed formulation. But then, if that formulation is made for dairy cows that ingest it, and then we take the milk and produce butter and cheese from that, we sort of have that continuum on the farm to fork spectrum there. And how do you look at sustainability across that? And our Truterra business is truly focused on that and looking at environmental footprint, greenhouse gas emissions, and even developing new markets like carbon for our members. Next. So, most of what I'll cover today is, in our business, what's critical and what I deal with every single day is a collection of data. And there's lots of data that's generated not only on farms, but we have research plots, nearly 150 of them in all the states in which we operate, where we plant different seed varieties, apply different crop protection practices, look at different ways of farming, collect all that data, and then make it available to our retailers that would have agronomists on staff that would work with producers. And one of the things we see as newer technology comes to the market is that in the future, there'll be nearly 4 million data points that will be generated from just a single farm per day. And how do you harness that data, turn it into information, and then turn that information into an insight and knowledge? So the future of farming is going to be data driven. I mean, to a certain extent, I would say today it's largely data driven, but it's going to be even more so in the future. And I think that's exciting. Now you combine that with some new technologies coming to market. And if we go to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about some of the technologies like remote sensing. Now, this is not exactly new. It's been around for the last 5 years. And especially with not only satellites, but drones, you're able to look at a field without actually having to walk into it. So what you see on this side, for example, is you take an image of a field, and actually you take an image of a county or even a state on one shot, and then you can collapse it down to one field. And wherever you have higher vegetation, so that's pin number 2, you can see that the crop is very healthy there, leaves are big, and you can barely see the sign. Where areas there's stress or there's some sort of a disease or something's happened on that portion of the field, there's nothing growing. And without having to step a foot on the field, you're able to get this type of information. Now, the way this is used is you could use it for planning purposes the next year to say, okay, this is how the field performed. What should we think about the next year, depending on the weather that may be predicted, or even as the season is growing, and that's where you see those layers of maps there. As each day goes by, and we're getting closer and closer to getting daily imagery with all the satellites that are up in the sky, but even the ability to send drones out to the field. You're getting a lot of insights about, what should I be doing on this portion of the field? How do I make sure that I protect the areas that are doing really, really well? So lots of insights you can generate from that, which is very exciting, and sort of kind of breaks a lot of the different manual practices that we had in place today. So it's really another way of looking at automation. If we go to the next slide. When we talk about sustainability, I think this is one of the areas where, it was controversial for a while, but now I think with, carbon credits and some of the other capabilities that are opening up, there's a lot of interesting things that farmers could do on a regular basis. So one of the things we do in our, sort of offering today is we actually do an assessment of a field and we give it a stewardship score. So something like you see on the top left, that number of a 78. However, that's a field that's managed in a sustainable fashion. But how do we derive something like that? Well, if you look at conventional practices, we take a field that has 225 acres, X amount of profit, and X amount of ROI on that field. But we also calculate soil erosion, the quality of the soil itself, and some of the emissions based off of the tillage practices and the back and forth of the equipment that goes back and forth on the field. So then we go, like, is there a different type of practice that we could put in place that doesn't hurt the profitability of the producer, which is very important. Environmental sustainability is something we have to strive for, and I do believe farmers are the original environmentalists, care about more about the land than anybody else. But what are some of the practices that we could change without being unprofitable? Because if it's not profitable, then the farm will not be there tomorrow. So if we click one more time, here's a different way of looking at a field where, in this case, we put in a cover crop and maybe change some of the tillage practices. Keep the profitability right about where it was before. But when you look at below at some of the stewardship scores, soil erosion has gone down, which is very important for the future anyway, because the less topsoil is gone, the more productive that field is going to be in the future. As a result, the quality of the soil has also improved. But when you look at the emissions, this field is no longer an emitter, but actually sequestering carbon back into the ground. And now, with a lot of companies trying to offset their carbon footprint, they're looking for ways to, is there an area where I could purchase credits? So I know for my business, take an example, a company like an Amazon or a Microsoft, they have these large data centers. And so they have a large carbon footprint, which there's a lot of practices they can put in place to reduce their emissions, but they can't take them to zero. But one way they can get there is by purchasing credits somewhere else. And so this now becomes an opportunity for producers and for farmers to be able to say, look, I have an opportunity and I can sequester carbon for you. And if we can have platforms like this that can be able to demonstrate that and certify it, then this is another method of being able to augment the profitability for a farmer while putting in place some good practices. If we go to the next slide, a couple of other things from a technology perspective. We talked a little bit about sort of the crop inputs and what happens on fields, but there's some interesting technologies occurring also on the animal side. And you can see here where for dairy cows, you could use a technology called computer vision, which you put on you can take a camera and then you put some algorithms on top of the camera. And what it does is it starts to analyze the animals. And there's a big algorithm behind the scenes where it's comparing the cow that the computer is seeing to like more of at this stage of the cow's life. This is the ideal weight and this is the ideal image of what it should look like. And so when you see on the top left, it kind of gives us an idea of is the herd as a whole, are they at the ideal weight stage? Are they over or are they too thin? And what that helps us, for example, do is give some insights into that producer of, should they be feeding their animal more, less? Should they be changing the formulation itself? Is it more proteins, more carbs, more minerals? What should that be, right? And so that opens up the idea that, the healthier we can keep these animals, the better off it is for that producer. And we're using technology to be able to give us a heads up on how we can tackle some of these problems. There's lots of technologies that are coming to market. I just talked a little bit about remote sensing, some of the computer vision with the animals. There's more things like augmented reality, and there's more statistical processing that's occurring for companies to be able to bring newer products, more insights to the market. And it's very exciting. There's lots of things happening in the space. And, obviously it's trying to take all those technologies that we hear about, every day and applying them to agriculture. So I think it's a very exciting space and lots of interesting things are going to happen here in the next, 5-10 years. It's hard for me even to describe what 3 years out looks like, let alone 5 to 10 years. But I know the future is bright and there's lots of interesting things coming. That said, if we click to the next slide, today, we talk a lot about the technology and how exciting it is. But one thing we're grounded on, it's the fact that it's not about the technology and it's not about some of the newer widgets that we bring to the market or that may be available, but it's about the people. And that goes back to the foundation that we're a cooperative and, making sure that communities are not only the individuals on the farm, but the communities in which they live in are vibrant, are sustainable, are being more progressive. That's important. And when that happens, then all of a sudden you have labor that's available, you have labor that's tech savvy and really be able to take things to the next level. So that's a key piece that we have to keep in mind. Again, it's not about the technology, but it's really about the people itself. So when you look at the people issues, what are we seeing? There's lots of issues in the market today. Number one, the technology coming is great. That's exciting. But there are lots and lots of technologies out there today that are, very focused in niche areas. But how do you put it together? So there's a lot of clutter that's occurring there, and it's going to continue for a little while. And then at some point, there's going to be some consolidation, some rationalization, and then fewer platforms will come to bear. But in the meantime, I think it's very confusing from a farmer's perspective on what should I use, not use? Is something I try? Is it something I implement on a regular basis? Especially if you're in row crops, you go year to year. There's not that many chances to play around with different technologies. Something that was mentioned earlier, interoperability, that is a concern today. The ag market and the ag sort of culture is very closed. So companies themselves are not willing to share and connect in other ways. It's not what we call open source in the technology area. So we've got to get to a place where there's more interoperability. So at the end of the day, whoever is using it has a better experience. I mentioned labor. Again, that's obviously as more and more farmers consolidate and there's less folks in rural communities because they're not vibrant, availability of labor and skilled labor that can not only work on these farms, but also labor that knows how to use some of these technologies is hard to find. But all of that, one of the big problems today that I run into every single day as I bring these technologies to the market is broadband. And the lack of solid broadband, whether it's fiber or some other technology that makes it extremely reliable to be able to deliver these technologies to the farm is a big gap. So if we go to the next slide, one of the things that as I work with the FCC and the USDA that we've identified is that there's a lot that we leave on the table today. Not only the productivity on a given field, because we're not able to take advantage of some of the technologies I mentioned earlier, but also because, again, there's no reskilling of labor. The community itself is struggling. The education aspect of it, even though with COVID, not having the ability to go to school, but not even able to do virtual learning that way has become a real problem. And even from a numbers perspective, there's a lot from a GDP standpoint that we're leaving on the table because we don't have access to this technology. So if we go to the next slide, one of the things as a farmer-owned cooperative that we focused on is this thing called an American Connection Project. And it's a coalition of nearly 170 companies that are advocating for broadband to be available in rural communities. How can we jumpstart that? It comes from making folks aware that there's a lack of internet connectivity today. It goes to having advocacy, specifically in DC, as far as there's funding required. Broadband is just as important as electricity and water these days, and maybe even more important in some cases. And so that's a basic necessity, and that needs to be funded. And then not only the funding aspect of it, but then when it gets deployed, how does it get deployed in a manner that is that's accessible to all, that folks can adopt it, and really make sure that it's well utilized and not get lost in some sort of sort of handoff between one agency to another, and kind of pointing fingers and things of that nature. So this is a big area of focus for us. We're making some big strides and be able to, again, people make aware, advocate for it, and then take some action on it. And I'm sure we'll talk more about broadband availability throughout the session. But I'll stop here. I look forward to the conversation, whether it's on the barriers and the challenges, as well as some of the technologies. But Shari, I'll turn it back over to you, and thank you for the time.
Great. Thank you so much, Teddy. That was an excellent way to get us going, to lay out a lot of the reasons why this matters to farmers, to communities, and to all of us. And also a great segue to our next speaker to really cue up the broadband issue as one of the key barriers. So our next two speakers are from the MiEnergy Cooperative Board. So I'll introduce them together and then let them jointly handle the next portion of our program. Dean Nierling has served on the MiEnergy Cooperative Board since 1999 and is currently chair of the board. He's also a self-employed farmer who operates a dairy and crop farm with his son and grandson and has been a strong supporter of electric and telephone cooperatives for several decades. Brian Krambeer is the president and CEO of MiEnergy Cooperative. He has worked in the rural electric program for more than 30 years and recently led MiEnergy's broadband initiative by partnering with two local telephone cooperatives to create an LLC company to provide fixed wireless opportunities to rural and underserved areas. Brian also serves on the Minnesota Governor's Task Force on Broadband Committee. He has a few slides to share, so I think I'll hand things over first to Brian and then for some remarks from Dean. So Brian.
Thank you, Shari, and good morning, everybody. MiEnergy Cooperative is in southeastern Minnesota and northeast Iowa. And you can certainly see from the picture, terrain is certainly a challenge for us in not only delivering electricity, but also in receiving broadband. Next slide, please. MiEnergy, our vision statement is to be the industry leader in delivering reliable, high quality energy services at reasonable prices with superior service to our members. And you can see this is kind of the demographic of our service territory in southeastern Minnesota and northeast Iowa. Next slide, please. We're a relatively new cooperative. We're the product of two electric co-ops that had been in existence for several decades, getting together in January of 2017 to create MiEnergy, to build a little stronger organization, to be able to do some of the things that we're going to talk about here in a bit on broadband in particular. So our merged company has 76 employees. We have 43 substations throughout our service territory. We have 5,500 miles of electric distribution line, about 22,900 meters, and about 18,800 members. We also provide service to 11 communities. We certainly meet the definition of a rural electric co-op. We have 4 members per mile of line when you look at our density. Next slide, please. One of the things that we looked at is that we need broadband to really operate our electric distribution system in the future. With the technology, and Teddy highlighted the importance of data. Well, that's also important to us as an electric co-op in getting that data to operate our system. And a good share, and in almost most of our service territory, was either underserved or had no service for broadband. So that not only was a challenge to MiEnergy Cooperative to operate our system, it was a challenge to our members that they did not have broadband. So we worked with 2 local telephone cooperatives, Spring Grove Communications and Mabel Cooperative Telephone, to create an organization to deliver broadband within our service territory. And again, that's part of the cooperative principles, cooperatives among co-ops. And very early on, it's had tremendous success. Next slide, please. Just in the short time that we have been with our partnership, we have been successful in attaining over $17 million in grant loans. And this has been from a host of different projects that we've looked at. Next slide, please. We've utilized the Reconnect program. We've also utilized statewide programs through the CARES program in Iowa and Minnesota. And again, $5.4 million on a Reconnect, another $9.7 through the Purple Ring in Iowa for another Reconnect grant. The CARES grants, again, in Iowa and Minnesota have been extremely successful. But we've really just begun for our project. We still have a vast amount of our service territory that is still underserved and has no service. Next slide, please. The nice thing is we're also being able to work very closely with the Minnesota Office of Broadband Development that's done a great job. And also in Iowa, the Empowering Rural Iowa for delivering broadband. And also very excited with some of the news just coming out yesterday of the Senate making progress for making even more resources available for rural broadband deployment as we go forward. So in next slide, please. So we are looking truly at kind of a hybrid program that fiber is certainly the vision and the direction that we're going. But we've also deployed some fixed wireless to be able to provide a quick reach to provide some service to our members in that area. So that gives you a little bit of a highlight of some of the things that MiEnergy is doing. And again, trying to partner with our neighboring co-ops to successfully deliver broadband to our members, which is so critical as we see not only as an electric co-op going forward, but also for the sustainability of our service territory and our members to be able to grow and access the information that others that live in maybe more dense populated cities have as an advantage already. So that concludes my slide, Shari. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Brian. So Dean, as the chair of this board, how do you find this initiative and the impact in the rural communities where you live and the farmers you work with or on your farm?
Well, I think it's been really critical in getting the things done that we needed to have done. I'll just introduce myself a little more before I get into it. I'm Dean Nierling from Northeast Iowa, along with my wife and my son and his family, as you mentioned, operate about 1,900 acres, 900 acres of corn, 600 of soybeans, and 400 of hay. I was going to go into a lot of the crop things we're doing, but Teddy really covered everything much better than I can. We do have a program that we use. It's called Climate View, and it's pretty much like he explained, doing the layers over all the fields and seeing how the fields are operating and performing, and then going and using that information into next year's crops and in the future too. So he really covered that very well. One thing he didn't mention, I guess, or I can mention that he didn't talk about was internet access is really critical to our dairy operation. We run about 165 herd robotic dairy operation. Internet access is critical to that. Our nearest technician is about 70 miles from us. And with the robot operation, there are several times where things happen that the technician there needs to get information from the computer that runs the robotic parlor. So he can actually get online and go into the system and see what's causing the problem. And many times he can even repair the problems from where he's at. So internet is sure very critical for that dairy operation. I guess that's mainly what I had to discuss this morning. Like I said, Teddy did a much better job than I can on the crop end of it, but it's real critical for that. So thank you very much for having me.
Great, thank you, Dean and Brian. And just a reminder to everyone to go ahead and put questions in the Q&A section. We'll be hearing from our next speaker, but then we'll open it up to Q&A, and it'll be great to have some questions in there when we do that. So now I'd like to introduce our final speaker this morning. Steve Pipstick is owner of Pipstick Farms, located near Maple Park, Illinois. Steve was recently elected chair of the Illinois Soybean Association and is active on many other agricultural organizations. He's also a well-known early tester and adopter of new technologies and serves as an advisor to ag tech startup firms. In fact, I think I first met Steve when we were both on a panel on a similar topic as today's. So I think, Steve, we welcome you and look forward to your remarks.
Hey, good morning, everybody. I'm Steve Pittstick, Northeast Illinois, a corn and soybean farmer. I farm with my son about 4,400 acres. We rotate. I've been doing this 45 years, and I often talked about 45 years of experience, but in reality, it's 45 unique one-year experiences. Every year is a little bit different, and I continue to learn even though I have this much experience. So I look back over my career, and as we talk about things here, the adoption of technology and whatever, I've typically been an early adopter. My family always has been. My dad and grandfather both were. It was different type of technology, but they were early adopters. I've been doing GPS-based soil sampling since 1993 and yield mapping since 1996. I have 25 years of yield maps on about 600 acres of land. Probably the coolest thing about that is telling the story of 25 years of data. I don't find a lot of value in that. Something that's happened over time is we continue to change everything that's going on in our operation. So the things that I did 25 years ago, we're doing a much better job of tillage. We're doing a much better job of weed control. Planter technology is better. We're placing every seed exactly where it needs to be placed. We have insect technology, we have weed technology. We just have a lot of things that are coming to us at the same time that we're collecting this data. So when I look at data, anything over about 4 or 5 years old doesn't have much value because we've changed so many things in our process to bring that yield that it's kind of irrelevant. So in a 50-50 operation, I've only got 2 years of really good data to make decisions from. Bear with me, there's a thunderstorm going on as I look out the window here, so I could lose power at any second. But looking at our operation, we've learned a lot from digital imagery, kind of seeing the things that we were doing wrong as a farmer. Traffic patterns, different parts of the field acting differently. That's been a real learning process. The other thing too that I think probably had the most value was in 2012 when we started seeing real-time data in our machines. We were making decisions based off of things that we were seeing and learning at the moment, instead of taking that data back to the computer and looking at it 2 months later and not being able to make those decisions. So real-time data collection is probably some of the best technology that I've had or used. So I look at broadband and looking across the state of Illinois. I've been fortunate to be in an area near Chicago, which we get technology really quick. There's lots of roads, lots of infrastructure. We get that real quick. But my counterparts in other parts of the state just haven't caught up yet. And I think rural broadband is very necessary. It's much like electricity was 70 or 80 years ago. We need to get to that last mile to get the opportunity for those people to be on board like the rest of us are, whether it's in the education or whatever it is, to have access to that technology. So as I've been an early adopter of technology through my career, I look at 2012, we started using digital technology. And as I said, we were looking at real-time management of things that were going on in the field. But we started sharing that data, and I was very quick to adopt or sign up as a member of one of the newest farm ag tech companies, because I wanted to share that data with others. I wanted to look at it in an aggregate sense and look at a bigger picture. While my operation was fairly sizable, I just didn't see enough. So I wanted to be able to share that data and then be able to look at others' data to learn faster. But now fast forwarding 5 or 6 years, I've kind of backed away from that data sharing somewhat. And I feel this sense in a lot of other of my peers that are looking at this. So one of the things is we share data. I'm giving away my recipe of what I do. And I think there's a lot of companies out there You know, a lot of you on here, you have companies and you don't share that with the world. And I think farmers are looking at what they're doing on the farm, and that's their proprietary process. That's their recipe. And I think there's getting to be a little bit of data hesitancy.
Steve, are you back?
I'm back.
All right, carry on. Fun with
Sure. I lost my train of thought there, but
Yeah.
we're somewhat hesitant on sharing data. You know, a lot of these models are built around the consumer methodology of collecting data to make life better. But on a farmer side, it's our income, it's our farm, it's the way we do things. It's a little better. So I think farmers are taking a little bit of a pullback on sharing data. I look around at my peers, and in this area, yes, we're quick to adopt, but about 90% of the land is farmed with some type of precision mechanical technology, whether it's auto steer, swath control. You can tell as a farmer driving down the road who's using this and who's not. It's been adopted. Digital technology is a little bit harder to see, but I look at most everybody that's in the game farming has a harvest machine that's 15 years old or newer. And 15 years is about where that technology started to be on machines as a base unit. So that technology, all that data is being captured. It just comes down to whether people want to share it or not. So I think just farmer adoption of technology, I think we're here, we're ready, we want to do it, but there's some hesitancy of what the value is, whether we can learn from the past because everything's changing in the background, or whether that sharing of that data and our processes could come back and haunt us at some time. So there's just, it's a evolving world out here.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Steve. We'll hope for good connectivity for the rest of our session together, right? So just a reminder, if people can put your questions in the Q&A section, not the chat function, it will let me be able to see all of the questions more easily and make sure that we get to them. So I think before we start taking questions, I welcome our speakers to come back on video and unmute yourselves and see if we have any reactions or comments to each other's presentations before I kick off with a question. I think it was a great way to kind of set the table for some of the key barriers and some of the key enablers of advancing digital ag on the farm. But any reactions or responses to each other's presentation? And you're all muted at the moment, so just a reminder, you'll have to unmute if you have a comment, and it looks like Teddy unmuted. So Teddy, do you have a comment or reaction you want to kick us off with?
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to hear a little bit from Dean and Steve on, you talked a little bit about the way it's helped you on sort of your farming operation, but has the technology brought real value? Meaning, like, have you seen an increase in bushels or reduction in man hours spent out in the field, or what are some of the benefits you're seeing from the adoption of some of these new technologies?
Yeah, so the adoption of technology. So if I look at machine technology and the things that we're doing in the field, I go back 25 years ago, and if I look at a field, we were raising 160 bushel average corn. But the variability within that field was probably 50% of that, basically 80 to 240. We didn't realize until we started mapping that we had that kind of variability. And as I fast forward to today, with the adoption of all this precision technology, we've raised our yields to maybe 220 to 240, but our distribution is much tighter. we may be 20 bushel either side of that mean. So we've learned from the things we're doing wrong. We've learned by seeing that picture of what's going on in the field, making up that average yield. We've been able to do better and collapse that. But also part of that was the technology that was brought to us by the biotech companies, insect management, the OEM machinery manufacturers with more robust machines, planter technology. So it's hard to really place it on one thing as being the thing that helped us. It's kind of everything is helping us a little bit each year.
I just add to that, I think the higher yields are of course important, but also the money savings that we can see getting there with the different layers of information we have on the crops. We can easily variable rate fertilizer placement to save money there, or even using the, like you mentioned before, the auto steer. If we do our own fertilizer application, we're not overlapping or skipping areas, so we see a huge saving there. With seed shutoffs and planters, we aren't planting into waterways or into end rows, so we're saving seed costs there also. So I think the saving can be a big part of that also, but both parts are very important.
Great, thank you, both of you. Any other comments or reactions amongst the panelists before we start taking our first questions? Checking your verbal and facial cues. Teddy, did you have another?
I have another one for Brian. I mean, so, you know, he and I both are on the broadband task force, but as a broadband cooperative, I mean, obviously there's the federal, I think there's a question in there which we'll get into a little bit more, and then there's state allocations, right, or state grants that come through. I mean, how helpful is that, Brian, as you deploy more capabilities to your members?
Thanks, Teddy. I think it's critical. Just to give you a little bit of an idea, I mentioned that on our electric system, we average 4 members per mile of line, so pretty low density. When you look at broadband, sometimes it can be less than that because not every household is maybe going to connect to broadband. So the connect rate may be even less than that. So when you start looking at a per mile cost of $18,000 to connect a farm within your service territory, it's critical that we get help from either the state or the federal level to be able to do that. Much as you referenced, Teddy, it's as critical as I think one of the most successful programs under USDA has been the Rural Electrification Administration in the early 30s to make it a mission. Let's get this done. And that's why I think broadband is our new frontier to do exactly that. And we definitely need support from the state governments and the federal governments to be able to get that done. And there's a reason why the people that live in the greater parts of America don't have broadband. It's not affordable. Otherwise, people would have extended that already. And just a comment to you, I really appreciated your feedback, Teddy, and presentation, just about all the different technologies that how to utilize that broadband connectivity once it's delivered to the farm. To providers, I think that's critical. And one of the things that hasn't been mentioned is also safety. Farm safety is also very important. Safety is a primary focus of MiEnergy. The members that we have connected will install Wi-Fi systems and be able to see where tractors and unloading and operations are within the farm. And what a great tool to be able to monitor your farm activity through connectivity just with an iPad. But that iPad isn't going to do you any good unless you don't have the broadband connection. So, thank you.
Great, thank you. Any other responses on that before we kick off with our first question? All right, well, I think I'd like to get us started on the broadband topic. We've got several questions there, and it's certainly timely with the infrastructure bill passing the Senate yesterday, and that's one of our first questions. If that bill goes through fully, is that going to be enough? Is the first question. Will that be sufficient to tackle the broadband challenges in rural America? And in fact, just as a stat, for we have a broad diversity of folks that are listening in today. Just to identify that gap, the Pew Research showed that 63% of rural communities have access to broadband, whereas over 90% in urban communities have that. You can dispute what the numbers are, but the fact is that a gap exists, a significant gap. So the question is the infrastructure bill going to help and be enough to close that gap? Anyone want to get us going on that?
Sure, I can get started on that one.
Right.
It will certainly help, and it'll put a big dent. Well, the plan depends how it gets deployed, but it'll put a dent into the problem. I don't think you'll cover it all. So you're going to have some more, partnerships, private, some other things you could do with not only the FCC or whoever they're going to be the agency that's going to be deploying this, but the USDA as well. Just to give you some statistics, the FCC had reported something around between 16 million households did not have internet connectivity yet. But we also know that number is not super accurate because that's on a census block basis. So, if the census block's lit up, everybody's covered, and that's not always true. So that number could be, closer to 40 million, for example. But one of the things is Brian and I worked on the task force a couple of years ago. We identified about a cost of $5,000 per household when you net it out and put on average, right? To be able to connect the household. Well, you multiply that number times how many, the 40 million, you can quickly get to a spot where it's not enough, right? That said, the 65 million, if put in the hands of the states to be able to deploy and what they need, I think they can make some big inroads, and they can find various interesting ways of deploying that capital and working with grants, identifying the areas that have bigger need, which providers can give them the biggest bang for the buck. So there's ways to be able to get there. So I think it's a great push in the right direction, but other creative methods will have to be found as well to be able to cover the gap.
Great, thank you. And Brian and Dean, with the rollout, especially at the state level, I know one of the concerns has been speed of access to the funds. So how do you access these types of funds? You have been very successful in accessing grants. And I guess, could you speak to that in terms of accessing grants at the state level and the speed of it? And then specifically on the infrastructure bill, how you foresee that rolling out to you?
Okay, thanks. I'd like to echo Teddy's comments on is that going to be enough? But also to highlight his point there that I certainly support those dollars going to the state level. I think they have a closer handle on the areas that are underserved and unserved to be able to allocate those resources. And I know in Minnesota, the border to border program is certainly a model that other states have followed. And I think that's a tribute to having that data and being able to know your state and where the challenges are. On speed, we could talk for 3 hours on speed. And I think there was a lot of debate on the Senate bill alone on what are the magic numbers. We've had discussion, as Teddy alluded to, on our task forces. Should we be going to the 100 by 100 or what is that number? I think I look at it is that a member out there that doesn't have any broadband at all, 25 by 3 is a step in the right direction. But I think nationally, we'll see what happens with the House. But the Senate is kind of stuck on the 100 by 20, I believe, is where they're at. So I think that's maybe a threshold on speed that we can look at. In our case, from what we see, we've been able to deploy fixed wireless and deliver, well over 25 by 3. That can be adequate if you have maybe one user at a time, but it is limiting. I think it's nice that we see a federal direction and maybe we can go forward on that. But it's a rabbit hole when you start talking about speed and what you need. And again, I look at let's get to a level that everybody has broadband and continue to build on it as we go forward.
Yeah, I agree with Brian. And I think with the grants and loans programs, probably critical using that money is to get the backbone put in place to different areas. And then like my broadband is doing, maybe going out from the fiber stops, using other techniques, other ways get the internet speed faster further out from there then. So I think using that money to get the fiber going is probably critical right now.
Speaking of internet, we may have lost Shari, so I'll just jump in and I can take a question from the audience. So what do you all think are some, maybe particularly for the farmers on the call, but what are some of the benefits or incentives you think that could possibly make you less data sharing hesitant?
That's a good question. I'm not real hesitant. But I'm becoming more hesitant, if you will, just because as I look at what we do with data and how we share it, and I've heard this from other farmers too, so it's not just my opinion, but how can that be used against us? So as we share data, whether it's our applications, so say I'm doing all of my applications by the label and doing it by the letter of the law, I'm documenting that. Well, what if something changes in the law down the road? And we see this in the prevalence of all the lawsuits on certain products from the use of them. All of a sudden, I can be, I've got proof that I did this action, and it's documented proof. I'm not worried about it, but I'm just saying it's there. Probably the bigger issue is there's been some trial balloons floated by industry on moving the way we purchase seed and products to an outcome-based price. So what that means is instead of buying a bag of seed, you pay so much per bushel raised. So a whole different formula than we've done for 70 or 80 years. Where I see the problem there is, I as a farmer, I buy a bag of seed, I pay the same kind of price that everybody else does within a few percentage, but my ability to grow a really good crop and do a good job and get a high yield, that's how I stay competitive. I try to beat my neighbor. I try to be competitive by doing that. But if you move to an outcome-based solution, we all pay the same at the end of the day, and we have no differential between us. So it kind of kills the incentive of what we have to go out and do. So I don't know where that trial balloon has gone, but it's kind of, I don't see it as much as I did a couple of years ago, so.
Dean or Teddy, go ahead.
No, I was going to ask Steve. Yeah, the outcome-based gets to be an interesting place, right? So, what assurances would companies, whoever is kind of asking for your data, would have to give you to make sure that you're comfortable with the sharing, or what policies do they have to put in place that make you a little bit more open to it?
Yeah, so most of the current policies are, we don't use your data. It's an aggregate form, but I still believe that it's being used in aggregate form to build a better solution, mainly with the company in mind and not necessarily the farmer. So that's a farmer perspective looking up. We're always suspect to everything. So just kind of the way it is. It's our culture.
Yeah. Would it be better if they, for example, were even if in aggregate, they actually have to explain what they're doing with it? I mean, I'm trying to figure out ways, because there's, obviously for the companies taking the data, there's value, right? And a lot of them will say there's value back to you because of the recommendations or the insights or whatever they give you back. But in a lot of cases, maybe that's not as transparent as it should be. And maybe, I don't know if the transparency would help with that or not.
Yeah, it's still in the trust of who's giving the message.
Yeah.
One of the issues in agriculture that we deal with, and so we pay for technology. So when a herbicide trait first came out, we paid a technology fee for that. Okay, after 20 years, that technology no longer works because Mother Nature adapted to it. And we've got to move to the next technology, but we're still paying for that first technology because it's in the seed, but it doesn't work. So this built-in, higher part, it's got us all suspect of what the motivations are and what's going on. So it just kind of resonates with farmers out here. Who do we trust?
Dean?
Yeah, I think just getting back to putting personal information on the internet, you always got to be careful what you put on there. So what you described today that's going on, like Steve said, might come back to haunt you in the future. So you just got to be a little careful what you do put on.
That's right. Yeah, so I've got a number of questions about that concern about data use and, if this becomes a disadvantage to farmers in the future and so forth. But wanted to turn for a moment to the infrastructure bill. So do you think that will provide that funding? You mentioned how expensive that broadband is. Do you have a sense of whether that will have a significant impact and how soon?
I think the optimum comment there is how soon. I think it's going to take time. I had mentioned that we're 18 months out just to get fiber. But as we know, the government process maybe isn't always the fastest. It still has a couple more hurdles to go through and then implementation. But there were some really good things. First is the funding was a good, robust number that I think Congress is seeing is making that a priority. I think the other thing is there's some programs already in place, Reconnect and One, that they're also looking at continuing and just providing additional funding. So I think those kind of things, programs that have worked, tapping those, funding those to be able to move those dollars quicker is going to be helpful. So, but time will tell is like everything.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I would agree with Brian. I mean, there's some of the timing aspect of it is critical, right? There's the components that that may not be available because of shortages that we see. Other things I know we discussed in the northern states is you don't have year round to be able to deploy infrastructure, right? I mean, when it gets to January, February, nobody's digging anything, right? So it's a shorter build cycle there. So that increases, the timeline as well. So the faster we can get the dollars, and we mentioned it earlier, for example, in the state's hands, the better it is, right? Because now at the state level, what you can do is exactly how many households, or at least they can get closer to how many households are missing it, which counties are more in need, where does it need to get deployed. So that's going to be an interesting piece of it and how that gets done. The other piece I think also is there's a lot of programs also in place to increase adoption, right? So to make it affordable to those who can't or maybe are in need. Some of those programs are not well known, right? And so part of this is, I think, one of the things on the federal side they could do is to say, okay, you're going to have access to these funds, but at the same time, you're going to promote these programs so that we get the adoption. Because if you don't have the adoption, I mean, it's not moving forward. I mean, you're not getting the benefit of what we're trying to accomplish.
Sure. So just bringing, looks like Shari's back, but we were talking a little bit about the infrastructure bill. So I can do one more question here, just make sure we get Shari back in. But related to some of the things that might come from that bill. But what are your thoughts on that? The effectiveness and the cost of the satellite internet, like Starlink versus fiber and cellular, and again, how that might play out as the infrastructure bill unfolds. I know, Teddy, you mentioned the state will be important for states to do the rollouts, but is that a decision for the states, you think, to make?
Yeah, again, I think, I mean, the satellite technology is another great option, specifically in areas that are really hard to get to. I know Brian mentioned, the terrain has a huge impact, right? So there's some places where, I mean, $18,000 a mile. There's probably a lot more than $18,000 a mile in some areas because of the terrain there. And so those kind of areas, and also where there's, not a lot of people in those specific areas. This gets to be an interesting technology, right? Because you actually have to just run fiber to a terminal, and then you have the dish, and like you get it through bouncing it off the satellite. Now, some of the things there, I think the technology is getting a lot better, and they have some great speeds that they're coming out with. But you also have a latency issue at all times, and that latency is also improving drastically. But now you get to the question of density, which means how many people are actually using that spectrum, right? So like, and so that's where it gets to be interesting. So the more people you have, now everybody's using it, does that reduce, the amount that others, that you can consume? So I think in areas where there's really hard to get to and there's low population, it's great solution. Now, as Starlink and others make more investments, does it get better for denser areas? That's what we'll have to see as that progresses.
Great, thank you. And Martha, I'm actually going to invite you to stay on. So just for an update, we are in the eye of a big storm. We're the red bullseye of a big red storm. And so that means Martha, Steve, me, Morgan may all have connectivity issues during this time. So I'm going to suggest we do this as a team, Martha. Also because as I came back in, the questions are now gone for me for some reason. So where I will go where I was going to go next, I've got several of the questions already queued up, but I'll ask you to tag team with me. And I think that'll be the best way for us to get through the eye of the storm. So since we were on Starlink, there were several questions about Starlink today. And it's funny, in one of our previous sessions, I think Starlink was held up as the silver bullet for the solution for broadband for rural America. So I think it's no wonder that we have several questions here about it. And so one of the questions came from someone who said, are there significant regional differences, in your view, panelists, on how Starlink will be able to tackle rural broadband? So for example, they said it's proven to be a good solution in California. Do you anticipate it being a good solution in the Midwest, since most of you are here in the Midwest? And if so, why? And if not, why not?
I would just comment on that, Shari, is that, again, echoing Teddy's comments, I think it's going to be kind of all of the above. There's going to be different technologies that we're going to need to tackle as we go forward. And technology is advancing at incredible speeds right now. So it may prove that it can do all of the things that it's looking at. I guess for our operation, what we do know is fiber is kind of the sure thing to be able to directly control and not have maybe some of the interruptions from weather and those kind of things. But I think it's a wait and see. But in the meantime, we are still going to try to do what we can to deploy fiber, proven technology. But we're also utilizing fixed wireless because we get into some areas, especially in Northeast Iowa, in the western part of our territory, it is relatively flat, where we can build fiber to a monopole and cover a 10 to 12 mile area very effectively. That's a quick technology to be able to deploy to cover a lot of people within an area, rather than the time to go back and to do the fiber. So, and then I think our goal in the long term is to have fiber there. But like I said, I think it's going to be a wait and see, but a lot of technologies to deliver broadband.
Great, thanks, Brian.
Yeah, and then one thing I'd add also that's going to be interesting is as more farms and homes get connected, and let's say whether it's the satellite technology or fiber or fixed wireless, I think that's obviously that's step one, right? But the other piece that we're constantly looking at is also the field itself, right? So today, I mean, there's no really need to connect the field, but in the future, I'm sure Dean and Steve have seen some of these interesting technologies, whether it's soil moisture probes or weather stations and other things that folks want to deploy on the fields, which are interesting. And, got still a little ways to go before they're, who takes care of it? What if I run it over with the combine? I mean, all those kind of issues that could occur. But and a lot of them are putting these technology solutions as kind of lower bandwidth. They want to use sort of the 1G, 2G band or the LoRaWAN because that's what's available today. But in the future, I mean, it would be great to have full coverage and be able to move data from these devices. So when that occurs, what's the right solution there at that point? Like, you can't have a satellite dish everywhere. Is there a combination of that plus some other way of doing fixed wireless? So I think there's going to be some interesting ways where we have to, as that continues to progress, about how we think about the solutions in the future.
Great, thank you. I think we know that rural broadband is one of the top barriers for advancing digital ag in rural America. So I think this was an important place to start our conversation and take the questions. Martha, were there any other questions that you see regarded to rural broadband connectivity that we should tackle before we move on to some of the other barriers and enablers?
There was one I saw about, these areas of low connectivity, they overlap with poverty areas. So again, it's things like the infrastructure bill may help with that on the adoption side, but it was just a question about, is satellite a good option given that cost, again, given that some of these areas overlap with high poverty areas. So I don't know if you all want to speak to that issue of just the rural financial challenges that also overlap with the connectivity ones as well.
From what I'm seeing, I mean, pricing is all sort of in the same range at the moment, especially in those rural communities, whether it's satellite, fixed wireless, or fiber. The cost, I mean, obviously the big cost is deploying it, right? Can you actually get it out and get it hooked up and all that? Yeah, some of the programs with the infrastructure bill, some of the electronic broadband benefit EBB program from the FCC. I mean, there's some programs out there, and I think there's more coming to be able to help with the affordability piece. And so that's where I think, as this new package comes out and more gets deployed, making sure folks are available about what's there for them is going to be super critical, right? And talking to, that's something I didn't realize in the past, right? When we talk about affordability, was the person was saying, well, I have actually internet in my area, and from what I hear, it's good stuff, right? It's fiber and all that, but they're like, it's $70 to $80 a month, and like I have to make a decision between that and a cell phone because that's about the same. And I'll take the cell phone because at least it's mobile and I can take it around with me, but I can't use it as my sort of internet usage at home because I quickly run out of data and then I'm tapped out. So that's a challenge there. So that's the conundrum people are in. So if there's ways that we can help that, that's a lot better, because now you can talk about reskilling and and figuring out, is there a way to go back to school, for example, on a part-time basis or at night, and then get a different job, and and with the technology coming, there's probably a lot more jobs available without having to move. So these are the types of things, not just giving the money, but making sure that like it gets put to use and that folks are really, kind of taking advantage of it and getting the spot where they can be productive.
Great, thank you. So I think when we look at some of the other barriers to advancing digital ag on the farm, the Purdue Center for Commercial Ag did a study for those who are not adopting digital ag on the farm. And they said that some of the key barriers are that they're either not profitable, too costly to implement, or have unclear benefits. Those were the top reasons why people didn't do that. So that relates to one of the questions from our audience about the costs of implementing data solutions and digital ag on the farm. It is a broad question, but I think an important one for us to tackle as one of the barriers. So maybe from our farmers on the panel, if we can start with you in terms of how do you tackle the costs of implementing? And Steve, maybe we start with you on your own farm, but also the farmers that you know.
Yeah, so as far as data collection, and we started using a major OEM system in 2009, 10, somewhat unreliable on a 2G basis. Moved up then to what was the FieldView drive that plugged into the CAN bus on the tractor, and through an iPad moved all the data frictionlessly to the cloud. That was a very easy solution. It was free, or almost free. There was something paying for that on the backside, but it was a free solution to get us to the cloud. If I look at some of the newest technologies, they're coming out on brand new machines only. And there's a high cost to adopt those machines. And as I look around, maybe only 10% of the acres in my local area are covered by new machines. It's mostly the legacy equipment that's getting the jobs done. And that's where it's a little bit harder to get machine data. It's not impossible, it's just a little harder.
thank you. Other input on the costs of implementing these digital solutions and how you tackle that.
I think sometimes it's not the cost that you have to get involved in all these things, but what you might lose out in if you don't incorporate them in your operations. And it's really hard for farmers sometimes to see how much they can save by not buying it. Is that really a savings, or are they losing out by not using it? So it's kind of a personal opinion or personal question to answer, I think.
I would just add, the adoption of auto steer was extremely fast. And it wasn't a ROI that caused that adoption. It was a quality of life. Once a dealer took a demo machine out with auto steer on it, the farmer just like automatically, I'm going to buy this. It made life so much easier because you didn't have to be on all the time. You could do other things in the background. So that technology was quick to adopt. Looking at other things, yeah, they're much, you know, what's the incentive for me to do it? Why am I going to do it? How's it going to make my life easier? So each individual precision technology has a different adoption curve based on what it can do for you. I think, you know, data collection in the tractor, some of the early systems that came out were challenging. When I go to the field, my number one priority is to do what I'm there to do. Data collection is not on my mind. So it has to happen in the background without a pain point. And a lot of the earlier systems didn't do that. I had to worry about technology and getting this going when all I wanted to do is plant or harvest. And with the weather the way it is, that's what I'm going to do. And the data did get collected. Pretty much now all those systems have moved past that, and they happen in the background without much human interaction.
Thank you.
Yeah, Shari, one perspective I can give you. This is an interesting one because obviously it's in an interesting position, right? Because we develop some of the technology. We work with a lot of the suppliers, whether it's the Bayers and Syngentas and BASFs and John Deere's that bring these technologies to market. But I also sit in, when we make some of the investments, I have to go into the boardroom, which is, farmers, and we have this discussion all the time, right? Like, how are we going to recover the cost of this investment? And what's interesting is, and Steve mentioned it, right? Because the way to get, it's a chicken and egg problem sometimes, because the way to get it adopted is you got to give it time. And Steve mentioned it, they only get so many chances, right? You get to try it, and then it's the next year, and then it's the next year. Before you know it, after 3 tries, you're 3 years in. And now as an investment, you got to invest in it for those 3 years. And as the adoption is happening, it can't be at a cost, because then you get to, from a farmer standpoint, you're going, what is this really going to do? And I haven't really seen the efficacy or the reduction of costs or the increase in bushels. So I don't really sure it's the value there. So you have to offer it almost near free, right, to make that happen. When that occurs, now the free is subsidized by selling something else, whether it's equipment or inputs or whatever else that might be, which then makes the whole industry a lot more guarded about how they become interoperable, right? Because it's like, we spent all this money to develop this solution. The last thing we want to do is connect to this other thing and make life easier for someone else who just kind of rides on our back, right? And so this is, it's a hard problem to unravel, and it's super interesting in my mind.
Yes, thank you. And I know from some of our farmer board members at Farm Foundation, this is a hot topic for us too. And I've heard from several of them prior to this forum. One is a West Coast fruit and vegetable farmer who said part of the issue is who should bear the costs of these innovations. And as a fruit and vegetable farmer, he said he's required to use many of them and to bear the costs of them. And so I think that's an ongoing question for us of how should we distribute the costs and benefits across the supply chain of some of these innovations. Any further thoughts on that from our panelists today of who should bear the costs, and are there any innovative ways to think about that?
I think that's a question that still has to be answered, right? And I think it's everybody, right? It's across the board. If you look at the value chain, it's across the board, and it's if there's value from a farmer standpoint, I'm sure Steve and Dean, like, if there's value for me taking cost out or increasing my productivity, or you open up new markets, then yes, like we probably make the investment, as long as like I can net out in a positive fashion on the other end. For the distributor or retailer, that's kind of the where I play. Yes, we have to make some investment, but the key for us is, could we get more farmers into our ecosystem, right? And if there's a motivation there, we could make that happen. And then obviously for the equipment manufacturers or the crop inputs, or sort of others on the higher up, early up in the value chain, is could they actually have a competitive advantage, sell more equipment or sell more profitable equipment? If that's the case, if they can make that work, then obviously they'll invest more. So that has to be found in that, right? And I think that's the ecosystem we play in.
Right.
I'll just add.
Go ahead, Steve.
I'll just add that we group all farmers together as farmers. There's a lot of us producing just raw commodities, protein, starch, carbohydrates, and then there's those of us that are producing a consumer direct food product. So as we start documenting our processes, what we do, me as a farmer just producing that raw commodity, there's not a lot of demand for that process from the livestock producers or the export market or whatever it might be. If you're raising a food product, whether it's vegetable or whatever, that's going directly in the food stream, you need that process management for recalls or whatever it might be. So a little bit different, still farmers, but a little bit different about the products.
Absolutely, yes. And an important point, small, mid-sized, large farmers, different geographies, different cropping systems, livestock, lots of different market-based solutions and costs. Before we leave the cost area, one of the other farmer board members in our organization, who's a large southern farmer, said one of the challenges and costs is the labor in her operation, having enough labor to help with the digital ag solutions, and then getting sufficient training for those people that are working with her. Any of you have either input on that from your own selves or from other farms in terms of how can we tackle that as a sector?
I think in our operation, some of the newest solutions that are very intuitive have helped the adoption and the use of that by some of the employees. And when I mean intuitive, it's like an iPad. My grandson is 2 years old, knows exactly what to do on an iPad. And I think it's become pretty intuitive for a lot of people in these iPad-based methods of collection to make the system work. Some of the proprietary systems a company has can be a bit cumbersome, but they are becoming more intuitive all the time.
Right. Well, I think this issue relates to another question that's in the queue in terms of how important is boots on the ground for the provider of the digital solution for farmer adoption, and what role do the boots on the ground play?
I can comment on that. I think this is one of the advantages that we're an electric co-op, and our partners are telephone co-ops. We're local. We are accessible, but also I think there's a big part of education that, okay, you start telling your members that, hey, we're delivering broadband. Our members really don't know, okay, what speeds do you need? What are you going to be using for technology? We have to do an education to help explain what we're delivering, but also to tailor it to maybe what uses and opportunities they can utilize the technology that we're bringing. And likewise, we have support people. I mentioned before being able to establish some cameras, set up a Wi-Fi network on their farm. I think those are all important things that we can do as a local provider to be able to give them maybe a little more comfort of the tools to be able to do that. So again, I think it goes hand in hand. You're not just going to be delivering the fiber and delivering the broadband. You need to deliver the education, and you also need to have the support services for them to be able to utilize your product. And that can be as simply as the router that they buy, to make sure that we have a managed router program to make sure that we know that if they're having problems, it's not because of where they went and maybe bought something that isn't compatible or isn't maximizing their benefits. So those are some of the thoughts that I think being local is a real advantage.
Great, thank you. Teddy?
Yeah, one thing I'll add, just a different perspective. And obviously there's, finding labor, and I'm sure Dean and Steve, temporary labor, for example, right, for when you have the peaks is probably not the easiest thing, and finding reliable labor that could be there, right? And so the question from our end, from a different perspective is, okay, so boots on the ground, super critical. I can't tell you how many, we've been targeting ag majors, and a lot of schools are offering now, ag plus something around computer engineering or software development, or just even basic precision agriculture, even as a major. We're trying to get as many of those as possible and get them out in the field, because we know they're tech savvy and they can help with a lot of these tools, and deployment is just as important as ongoing support and being able to help, right? But the other piece, though, is that as we continue to automate maybe more tasks and see if we can get less labor there, to Steve's point, if the tools become more intuitive to use, well, there's an art to make them more intuitive. But actually, the more intuitive is on the front end, the more complex it is on the back end to make sure it's intuitive on the front end. So a lot of artificial intelligence and automation that needs to happen behind the scenes. But one opportunity that opens up is we can go and recruit now different type of folks that maybe don't have an ag background. Maybe they're from an urban setting, but they are interested in computer science, and they're interested in software development, or even the combination of mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, and software development together, which gets to the equipment piece. That's a different skill set that we can bring into the industry. And by the way, as we go to schools to recruit, agriculture is a great industry with a noble purpose, and it's to tell someone that you can impact the food production, you can impact the fuel production, you can impact the fiber production in this country, and really strengthen it with the use of technology. I think that's a great message, and it resonates even with the Gen Zs that are coming out of school now. So that's another kind of perspective as far as labor is concerned.
Great, thanks, Steve.
Yeah, I was just going to add here, as we look at farmers, farmers do things differently than the general consumer. And a lot of the digital products were brought to market with the consumer, what worked in the consumer market, trying to bring that to agriculture, but it's totally different. So as a consumer, whatever you do, whatever's pushed on you by the algorithm based on what you look at, other people are buying, it doesn't impact your business. But on the farmer side, it's my business, it's what I do. If I'm a fifth generation farmer, I don't want to upset the apple cart and be the guy that lost the farm by changing something dramatically. So the slower adoption because of that mindset is real. I, as a farmer, look at things, how they're coming at me, what I'm doing, what the objective is. It's just a different experience in the digital space. I want somebody out there, I wouldn't say necessarily holding my hand, but somebody that sees a whole lot more outcomes in different fields. Things are changing so fast on the farm. Weeds. I used to plant a soybean variety for 4 or 5 years. The last 4 years, 2 years is the maximum that we see a variety. So getting any confidence in how that performs or whatever, it's much more difficult. And it's happening because of changing herbicide trait platforms. We got a quick turnover, so we don't see the outcomes. So being able to have that person on the ground helping us with those decisions is vital.
Great, thanks, Steve. Martha, let's go to some of the top upvoted questions that came in before we lost connectivity. Can you tackle 1 or 2 of those, please?
Sure. Steve, you may have touched on this a little bit when you talked about, your urgency of just getting and planting rather than shopping around for technology. But as a farmer, and Dean as well, how do you select what data systems or programs to use, since it seems that almost every manufacturer, retailer, equipment company has something to offer. So how do you make those strategic decisions?
Yeah, so for us, the ease of use was the paramount driver. So initially we used the John Deere system because that was on all of our machines. It was easy to use. We had data going back to 95. I wanted to stay in the same platform. So I had all this historical data in one place. But when FieldView came available in 2012, 13, it was a much easier platform. It used the iPad to move that stuff to the cloud. We migrated a lot of it. That was our primary source of data acquisition. We still did the John Deere data in the background because it was there. I wanted to stay in that system. But then the APIs came in so we could move data back and forth. So I collect it right now, most of it, because most of my machinery is legacy type stuff, older than 5 years. So the climate platform works the best. So we capture the data there and then use an API to move it to the John Deere where I have all the historical data.
Dean, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think that's right. You basically have to use what's compatible with the machinery you have. And whatever it is, you just have to take advantage of that product. And the FieldView is compatible with a lot of different machinery manufacturers. So that makes that a pretty popular program, I think. So it's basically, you can use what is compatible with your equipment.
Thanks. So we had a question, I think, for you, Brian. In your presentation, you had showed that MiEnergy showed 4 members per mile. So if the average household has, in the average household of 14 connected devices. So do the farmers here too, or you, Brian, have an estimate of the connected devices per farm or per acre if broadband were to be available and affordable?
We don't have really an account of the number of devices. What we're really looking at that we can monitor is what kind of packages, meaning what's the speed package that they need, which potentially may determine, what are they using this extensively or what. But we don't have any way or data to know how many devices that they're utilizing on the individual farm. And like Teddy alluded to, being able to have soil moisture probes out there, the possibilities are endless. I think they're going to continue to grow. But I think in most cases, it's a speed that's being able to download the data from their platforms to operate on, run their Wi-Fi networks, and that kind of technology to go forward. But it is continuing to grow.
There's still a lot of questions and I think discussion on that issue of data sovereignty for farmers and trust. Another question on that is just kind of picking your brains of what you all think the source of that is. I know one of you mentioned earlier, it may be fine now, but the laws may change, for instance. So do you think the hesitancy to share data from the technologies perhaps is due to concerns about cybersecurity or competitiveness from foreign countries, or due to the fact that companies are monetizing environmental sustainability benefits like carbon sequestration, et cetera, that you are measuring, and you think that's just constantly changing? So some more thoughts on if we could dig back into that data privacy question.
Yeah, I'll just go first. I don't think there's a lot of external threats. I think it's the main fear is the company that's giving us the data package, if you will. So FieldView, it's a great package, but what are they doing with my data? That's where the fear is. And are they monetizing it to price products and whatever to be used against me? And not really against me, but financially pricing their products based on my use or regional use, things like that. So part of me is like, this is a better way of doing things. But then there's part of me is like, yeah, you're making me pay for it. I'm losing my competitiveness. We're even in the platform. I'm not sure if that's where we want to go.
And sorry if my video's Shari mentioned we have this wild storm out the window. But touching on that privacy issue, related topic is traceability. So we have a question about transparency, making data available throughout the food chain, throughout the supply chain. So how important is it for the farmers really to see how the food is being handled downstream on its journey? There's been a lot of discussion, of course, on consumers want to know where and how their food got to them. And we're seeing more direct to consumer sales of agricultural products. So how do you see technology playing positive or negative role in that question of traceability?
I'll try to tackle that. So it's as I said earlier, there's the two sets of farmers, those that raise food and those that raise feed. And the feed is much less of an issue. Some of the food producers, the pork producers, whatever, chicken farms, those at some point may want to look at their feed source and our process and what we do from a carbon footprint standard. Or system and how sustainable are we, and that goes all the way through. I think that's where it's going to go. The traceability of the products and the things that we use, I don't know that that's a big issue or ever will be, but then again, I don't know that it will be. But I think it's more on the carbon. That's a topic today that may go away in sometime in the future. Yeah.
One thing I'll add on this one is I think there's transparency. I mean, as a CPG, right? Because you see it all the way through. There's transparency and traceability, and get that question all the time. Like, from a consumer standpoint, I would love when I buy this, box of butter and I open up the stick, I would love to see which cow it came from. Like, do you really want to know that? And the reason I ask is, I mean, that's nearly impossible, right? I mean, right at the dairy farm, the mix amongst cows is mixed together, so you can never go back to the same exact cow. And even beyond that, in the milk routes, when we pick up the milk from one dairy producer to another dairy producer, that's mixed in together, and then you go all the way downstream and there's more mixing that happens. So in order for us to be able to keep that all separate, that's a huge investment, right? And that would not be, if that translated in the cost of when you buy the butter at the store, it totally would not be acceptable to anyone. But that said, it's like, well, why do you want to know? Right. Well, I want to know what methods were used along the way. I want to know what products were put into the, into the product that I'm buying. I want to know what practices were put in place. And it's like, okay, well, we're asking more about transparency, less about traceability. Right. So you want to know, and that's the key, is to make sure that we should demonstrate the transparency. And even education in the process. Here are the ingredients and the products that went into the food you're consuming, right? If you can't understand what that is, here's the processes and the practice that were put in place all the way from the start, all the way to the end. And here's what you need to know about that. Now, if folks really want to know that, and we can make that available on labels and things like that. So I think it's more of how do we tackle the transparency side, because that's the black box that a lot of folks don't understand. And if we can tackle that, then I don't know that traceability will be as big of a deal, but that's kind of my thoughts on it.
Great, thanks. And I'm going to invite Martha to chime in with some of the work. A lot of what we're talking about today touches on our broad body of work at Farm Foundation, and Martha has been leading our data interoperability work. Martha, did you want to weigh in on this topic as well?
Yeah, Steve, it was interesting what you said about the traceability of feed. We are actually hearing different groups interested in this for reasons related to tracking of animal disease and all the way back to feed. I don't know necessarily there's a correlation there. I'm not the veterinary expert by any means, but there is an interest certainly that we've been starting to hear of that traceability back all the way to the cornfield.
Great, thank you, Martha. And just as Teddy said earlier in the conversation, that there'll be a shakeout probably in the plethora of solutions that are out there through M&A and so forth. So too, I think we're in a testing period. While 80% of shoppers say that traceability matters to them as either important or very important, according to the Food Industry Association, I think we're in a testing period right now with consumers to really find out their purchasing patterns with how that aligns with what they say is important to them, whether it's with transparency or sustainability. So I think the next couple of years will help us better understand that with shopping and consumer purchases.
I think for the consumers, there are national and state inspectors involved in a lot of the food production, especially with the meat and the milk products. And they have to rely on them people to be doing their job. That's what they're getting hired for. So they need to realize them people are out there and visible very often on the farms.
Great, thank you. All right, I think we're going to tackle the next question that's been voted on the most here, which it says, it seems like many in the agricultural community are constantly playing catch up when it comes to connectivity. Do you ever see this changing? And will farmers ever be on the cutting edge of connectivity tech? Somebody want to kick us off with that one?
I personally love that question. Because I really, that's where I think, having farmers be on the cutting edge of connectivity. I mean, this is why I think the broadband piece that we brought up earlier, that's kind of the foundation. You need to sort of have that in place. But I have been working with several institutions, and the goal is, could we actually bring innovation like some of the newer things to be tested in rural communities, right? So as an example, if you're talking about autonomous vehicles. I mean, both Steve and Dean talked about the auto steer. I mean, that's a form of autonomous vehicle. It's been around for a while in agriculture. And one of the reasons you can't do it is because, yes, if it goes sideways, there's a lot of downside to the farmer, but there's not a whole lot of other things you can hit in the way, right? Or people you can kill other than maybe the operators that could happen in some cases. But so if you wanted to try out autonomous driving and all the things to get the algorithms to be better, what better place to try it than in more of a rural setting than in an urban setting, right? Before you bring something to an urban setting. And along those lines, is there a lot more, cutting edge technology, if the broadband is there, that you could bring into a rural community to test it, right? So it becomes a test bed. So there's been, could you actually could Silicon Valley be in a rural community in the future? That would be exciting to see. I think that would be a different way of thinking about all this. So yeah, but you do need some of the basics in place first, right? So now we're not talking 25/3 or 100 by 100. We're talking 10 gigabit or 20 gigabit. So that sort of investment. And I think if we can think of the future and put that type of infrastructure in place, then yes, I actually think farmers can be on the cutting edge.
Yes, there's several Midwestern investment groups, so that it's not just Silicon Valley that is funding these innovations. It's all across the US, both VC and corporate funding. And some of the Midwestern models are using farmers who can co-invest and test these. So to kind of along those lines of what Teddy was just saying. Any other comments on that question before we take another one? All right, the next one touches on cybersecurity issues. So are there any concerns that data sharing could provide nefarious actors with insight into potential weaknesses or opportunities for cyber attacks? Somebody want to get us going on that one?
Just to relate that on our operation is that is one of our top priorities right now. And I think it's part of the education process. Is when you adopt the technology, you also need to adopt the security side to protect that. And I think it's evolving. As we've heard other organizations across the United States have had negative consequences. I think we need to continue to evolve and to try to stay a step ahead of that. But again, it's when you get the connectivity, with that comes the responsibility to also make sure that it's protected.
Dean and Steve, from the farmer perspective, how do farmers stay up to date on how to protect their operations and their cybersecurity?
Yeah, I'll just go. It's not something that's on my radar. I don't know what somebody would get into and see or do. My bigger concern from a technology standpoint is back to that sharing of the data with whoever. So say the major OEM manufacturer on the newest machines, they're getting all of the production data. They're getting all the machinery metrics. They finance a lot of the operations, whether it's the machinery or through a seed company. They know everything about me. And I don't know that many people are aware of that, but maybe that route, I'm a little more concerned about what they know about me, just kind of in the background. All this information is going to them without us thinking about it much.
Thank you,
Yeah, I
Dean.
guess we probably just rely on our internet providers to take care of the security for us, or we're hoping they're doing it. And I think on an individual farm, it'd be pretty tough to be able to take care of that on your own, just because of not knowing how to do it and having the and being able to afford doing it on such a small basis.
Great, thank you. And I know you all touched on this, but since Steve brought it again about data privacy, data rights, I don't know if you tackled this before, but one of the questions that came in before was what rules or laws are in place to protect farmer data rights? And do you think there needs to be more to protect farmer data rights? Steve, are you willing to tackle that one?
There's a number of things that exist out there already, the data transparency platform, things like that. Yeah, they're doing the best they can, but still, what is the value of that aggregate data? They're protecting us on the farmer by farmer level individually, but that aggregate information, that's kind of fuzzy yet.
Okay, thank you. Other responses on that one? All right. The next question up is related. It has to do with reporting. So will having better broadband and much more tools and data help farmers in situations where there's required or regulated reporting for things like nutrient management plans or conservation programs? And will new technologies save the farmer time and money in managing and streamlining those types of tasks?
I would just say from our operation, yeah, it is much easier. So I have paper records going back to 1990 of everything that I did. It's difficult to go find those and retrieve them to figure out what I did back when, but now we're doing everything digitally. Again, I'm not sure that it's the right thing to do, but we're doing it, and it's very easily accessible to go back and figure out what fertilizer I put on what field in 19 or 2016 or whatever it might be. It's very quick and easy to find.
I think the COVID made us realize we can do a lot more online than we thought we might be able to. Our county records are kept through the FSA offices, are mostly done over the internet now. We need to have special licensing for spraying certain products. And to get these licenses, you have to attend classes. And that used to have to all be done in person, but that can be done online too now. So I think there's things that have changed that are probably actually benefit to us.
We were just talking about this in our operation with regards to the use of technology for insurance reporting. We have had multiple weather events, and one place it's not used and not accepted is the use of drone technology for reporting on crop damage in our fields. So how do you foresee the continued rollout of technology for regulatory and reporting, especially in insurance? Nobody else is having trouble with that?
I think it'll just happen with time. Years ago, you couldn't use like a yield monitor for reporting yields from crops. You had to use measurements and sales receipts, where now you can actually take combine monitors and take the yields off of them and use them for your reporting. So I think the same thing will happen in other things after it gets accepted enough in being used on the farms.
Great. It looks like this is a related question. Let's see if we can tackle this. We may have covered most of it, but it says remote sensing is only as good as the reference data available for comparison. This person was working in the USDA in the 1980s when it began developing reference data for crop production. Data being collected today is, of course, proprietary, which limits data sharing. That said, the larger the reference collection, the more accurate the assessments of crop conditions and risks. And so the person wonders if the insurance industry's use of nonprofit institutes with which some data is shared might be a way to address this issue without compromising competitiveness or raising antitrust issues. Anyone want to tackle that one for us? Teddy.
Yeah, so I think when insurance companies, I know they're starting to look at that information or look at NDVI, not necessarily as a determination for how to, leverage or how to make a decision, but more of an indication of a predictor, right? So it's kind of an input to things you might offer or things you might accept and whatnot, as an indicator. That's the word I was looking for, as an indicator of sort of what's going on. As far as the sharing itself, I mean, there is, the imagery is kind of more widely available now, just the ability to take an image. Then you have to process the NDVI, which is the algorithm you put on top of that to determine the whole, blue, green, red, yellow, et cetera. Some of that is proprietary and how some of the companies are doing it, so they're guarded when it comes to that. But I do think there is an opportunity. If other players like insurance companies, maybe even on the grain side, start using images as an indicator, where some of that information can be used sort of as here's the base and everybody can leverage this, but then obviously put your individual secret sauce on top of that. That said, NDVI has been around for quite some time now, so I think it's also losing some of that value proposition. There's more spectrums that different companies are using now, where they can build more of their proprietary piece. So, I do see that going in that direction.
Thank you. Steve?
Yeah, I just see the opportunity going forward as we look at technology and where it's going, for insurance companies to look at fields on an individual basis. So through imagery over time, I think each field could be set up with like a credit score, if you will. So you get the personality of the field, and then the insurance company could use that to go over or under based on that historical data. There's certain key elements that would be identifiable to know that. I think the insurance industry is going to change as we get more data. If you look at the automobile industry, I think as a driver, there's some certain indicators of how you drive that is related to the predictability of accidents, whether it's speed or the speed you back up or how quick you start, things like that, that will drive the insurance rates in automobiles. But I think that same kind of thought process can happen on fields. Every field has an individual personality, and then moving that through with a rating system or whatever it might be.
Great, thank you. Martha, can you help me assess if there are any other questions that have been upvoted that we should tackle from before or currently? Otherwise, I have some zooming out, wrapping up kinds of things that we can do together.
Sure, I think you could probably head over to what you had, Shari.
All right. Great. So what I'd like us to do collectively as a panel is to think through the questions that we've gotten so far, what you've already presented, and really reframe this discussion as we have about 10 minutes left together. So the way we framed this was, the key barriers and enablers to advancing digital ag on the farm. So let's first just talk through the barriers, and have we tackled all the barriers today, or is there something else remaining? So beforehand, we thought about the barriers of being connectivity, which I think we've tackled quite well. Too many options, more options than will succeed, just a lot of noise for farmers to have to choose from. Maybe the solutions don't always solve the top pain points that farmers are facing. I think we haven't really spoken as much about that, so I think we may want to come back to that. Staffing or capacity as another, and data interoperability. So those were 5 that we thought of collectively before. So let's tackle some of those and then see if there are any others remaining. To the point about it doesn't tackle, the solutions on the market don't always tackle the top pain points farmers are facing. How might you react to that, Dean and Steve especially? In fact, I heard from some of our farmers saying that's one of the challenges, that they may have some problems that are top of mind that either nobody's tackling or that the primary solutions don't tackle. Do you find that to be true, Dean or Steve, for yourself or the farmers that you know?
I'll jump in here. Looking at imagery. So imagery is brought to us as a solution. You can see what's going on in the field and react to it. For me, imagery is kind of a autopsy. It's post-mortem. I need to be predictive instead of reactive. So if I've got a spot in the field that is declining in health or whatever it might be, when that shows up on the image, it's already too late. I got to go fix it. I got to try to cure it, bring it back. Images are, again, reactive. We need to be predictive. And in all this data, that's the idea, is to be predictive, to take the variability out of what's going on. But probably the biggest hindrance in my operation is reliable, forward-looking weather. And I don't know that we will ever fix that. It's just too big to get our arms around. But I don't know if it's going to be a drought this year, if it's going to be a flood, which week it's going to rain, which week it's going to be hot, and what decisions can I make? Once I plant that crop, I've set things in motion for the year. There's not a whole lot of things that I can change after I do that. I'm reacting to the things that are going on in the field. And then I, wipe the slate clean at the end of the year and I start over next year with a new thing, but not knowing what that forward-looking weather is. How do I make a plan? So we plan for the average, and we built our system personally to try to negate those extremes, if you will. So we went to a lot of post-applied nitrogen 10 years ago. So put it on the crop right before it needs it, instead of checking the box and doing it the fall before or pre-plant. Try to put it out there when the plant needs it. It changes our workload enormously. We're in a very small window. It's very intense for a couple of weeks getting that done because the crop is growing. But it's made the nitrogen equation in our whole recipe not a big deal anymore. So we've adapted, we've learned, we continue to evolve.
Great, thank you, Steve. I sometimes do slides that show like what's top of mind for farmers, and I have all the thought bubbles, and then what's top of mind for the industry or policymakers. And some of them overlap, but they don't always overlap. And I think weather is one that is always top of mind to farmers. And I know on our farm, we use maybe 3 to 5 different solutions, none of which are exactly right, which is why we try to use 3 to 5 to kind of triangulate or get to the best data and solutions. So I think that is an ongoing challenge. Weather and then markets, I think, are the 2 top ones that farmers are always looking for better information on.
Yeah, my top 2 apps on my phone are weather and markets. That's what I live and die by. When I wake up in the morning, those are the first 2 things I look at, and that's my life.
Yeah, same here. Dean, do you have any other things to add to that in terms of what's top of mind to farmers for solutions?
Nothing really to add, but I would concur with that there's just a lot of variables that we can't control, and you just learn to live with those, and deal with them the best you can. So nothing more to add, really.
Thank you. And when I was recapping the barriers, I should have said cost as the 6th one, as the key barriers. So before we conclude, let's think about the enablers then. Let's not leave on the downer of the barriers. So we've talked about some of the enablers being some of the collaboration, the infrastructure bills, Starlink, creative solutions like we've heard from today with partnerships. What else are enablers that we maybe haven't tackled enough today that you'd like to raise up before we conclude?
Maybe just a comment, Shari, is that I want to thank Teddy and the other panelists here, but the one thing is MiEnergy is a cooperative. Our telephone partnerships are cooperatives. Land O'Lakes is a cooperative, and I just want to thank Land O'Lakes and Teddy that we're getting the dollars that we desperately need for broadband deployment, but there's been some pretty large platforms where the leadership at Land O'Lakes is has really been screaming, saying that we need broadband in Greater America. And I know our national association has been doing the same. So I'd encourage farmers to, continue to communicate that message, and also to work through their local co-ops to hear that also.
Great, thank you. Any enablers, especially on the people side? I know, Teddy, you started by saying, it's about people and communities. Other ways that we can enable people and communities better or differently?
Yeah, I mean, I think a big focus, we talked about the broadband bill and everything else that's coming, right? And that's obviously a kind of a foundational piece, but I think making rural communities more vibrant is critical, right? Like, it's got to be a place where not, right now we're worried if people want to stay in those rural communities and walk away. I'm almost on the other end. Can we actually get people to come back to rural communities, right? Like, so, I mean, there is a lot of, I think there's a lot of appeal for a lot of different people to be able to come back to a rural setting. And when you have that, a lot of things change, right? So now all of a sudden you have more stores, and then you might be doing more online interactions, whether it's shopping or whatnot, which means now those routes have to be filled. And so other companies have to, make sure that they take those communities into consideration. Another thing is fresh food. I mean, ironically, in a lot of rural America, fresh food is not readily available, right? Like, so you grow the crops that you're good at growing, and that's, as a farmer, I think that's what any farmer is doing. But like, who's all the diverse crops that you might need that may not work in that community? Who's doing that? How do we get access to that? So I think that's critical to focus on that. And how do you make more rural communities more vibrant? And there's several programs available now to where, through the American Connection Project, we actually have an American Connection Corps. Can we send folks in those communities that can actually tackle these issues, right? And what are some of the changes that need to be made in addition to the broadband piece? So I think that's super critical, right? And even from someone who works in a corporate setting, I mean, if given the choice, I mean, with the right connectivity, whatever, now that virtual working and virtual connectivity is available, could I work from a rural community? Like, yeah, I would love to, like, if that's a possibility. So I think there's a lot more there that could be that we could get into.
Great, thank you. Well, I know we just have a couple minutes left, and I like to try to end by giving the farmers the final word. So Dean or Steve, any final words before we hand it back to Martha? Dean, do you have any final words?
Well, I just feel that the group that MiEnergy and Mabel Telephone Company and Spring Grove Communications formed was really a big benefit for our whole area. And I think other communities should look at consolidating ideas like that together with their neighboring co-ops. It just made a real sensible solution to a lot of problems.
Great, thank you. And Steve?
Yeah, I really enjoy forums like this where we can spread the word about what we do, what our pain points are, and to those thought leaders and whoever they may be, how we get solutions and how we move to the next level. So thank you for having me on today and being able to share some of my thoughts.
Great. Well, thank you to each of our panelists for the wonderful conversation and insights, and to our audience for all their wonderful questions, and to everyone for their resilience through our connectivity issues with the eye of our storm passing through here today. So with that, I'd like to hand it back to Martha to wrap up for today.
Sure. So thanks, Shari. Again, just echo my thanks to everyone for participating and for your patience with us on this. We appreciate everyone's engagement with us and would love to hear your feedback. So please take a moment to share your comments about today's session in the brief survey you will see at the conclusion of this forum. Our next Farm Foundation Forum will take place coming up soon, is expected to focus on farmer financial health. So please watch your email and our social media, and we'll be sure to announce that when registration is open. If you'd like to help us continue providing valuable programming such as today's forum, I'll quickly remind you that you can simply text the word field to the number 44321 to receive donation instructions. Each and every gift strengthens our ability to address rapidly evolving issues impacting agriculture, the food system, and rural communities, and we are so appreciative of your support. So thank you once again for your participation today, and we look forward to seeing you at future events.